our tutorials for the month of August with me, Claire. This is week 2 of 4, and this week we're going to be focusing on embroidery. So last week we focused on different types of stitching techniques. We looked at the seed stitch, the cross stitch, the running stitch, the back stitch and the French knot. So this week we're going to be developing our skills that we learned from last week. We're going to be learning a few more embroidery techniques, and then we're going to be putting them into practice by making some lovely designs. Now the design you choose is entirely up to you, so just be creative with it. Feel free to sew along with me. If you want to copy off what I'm doing, that's absolutely fine, but if you're feeling a bit more adventurous, just go for it. I want you to remember to save anything for the exhibition in December. It'd be lovely to show your progression and see how well you're doing with your embroidery and your sewing. Send some pictures over as well to the Facebook page, pop them on the Atrium community page, because I'm sure everyone would love to see what you've been up to. So in your pack you have this embroidery guide. And this is what we're going to be working from today. So what you're going to need is a piece of fabric, and I'm going to be using this. It's called Binker, and it's got lots of little holes in it, and they're all evenly spread out. So this is going to be a guide for you to use for your embroidery when we're learning these new techniques. You're going to need some embroidery thread, and there's a lot of that in your pack. There's lots of different colours to choose from. If you want any specific colours, just get in touch and we'll sort it out for you. And then you'll need quite a strong needle, just so that it can handle this thread, because it is quite thick and it needs something to support it, like this big needle to go through the fabric. Okay, so if we remember last week we did the back stitch, and if you want to see how we did this, go onto the video from the previous week and you'll be able to see exactly how you can do a back stitch. But what we're going to do today is develop this into a threaded back stitch. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I've got my Binker and I've started doing a back stitch on there. So like I said, this fabric has got lots of little guides in it, so you can see the difference of when I've done it freehand to when I've followed the guide, so it's a lot neater. So a threaded back stitch, all I've done is a line of back stitch, and then I came through at the end so that the thread is come through the back of the fabric and now it's on the front of the fabric. And all we're going to do is get our needle, and if you see every stitch, it might be a little bit difficult to see on the camera. So each stitch we're going to go through. We're only working on the top part of the fabric. Our needle's not going to go through, okay? So I'm going to go through that one. And we're going to not put it all the way through. We want it to kind of look like it's going through like a snake. So we went through the first one, and then we're going to go on to the next stitch, go all the way through. And then we're just going to work all the way along. Just going in and out until we get to the end. can get a little bit tricky when your thread gets caught, but just remember to keep it quite loose and make sure it's not sort of getting tied up at the back. And you can always go back in with your needle to reshape any of these. Just going into the last one here. I'm going to get the sharp end of my needle and just shape these to how I want them to go. And then I'm going to pop the needle through the very end just to hide, like to finish off and to hide the rest of the thread. And then we'd finish off by tying a knot in the back. But there we go. That is a threaded back stitch. I think it's a nice little pattern. You could maybe use it around the edges of your embroidery. You could use it if you were doing like an ocean scene or something. It could be nice as waves. I think it's just a good little effect. So that's our first one done. The next technique we're going to look at is a double running stitch. So, you remember last week we did the running stitch all the way around the edge, and then I showed a little variation of how you could use different lengths of thread. So, what I've done is, I've got a piece of binker, and I've done 2 lines of a running stitch. And again, because of the guide, this is a lot more neat and very accurate. With the double running stitch though, you can have it side by side, or what I've done is I've offset it a little bit so that they're on, the stitches aren't exactly right next to each other. So you've got this gap and these like diagonal lines between. So that is a double running stitch, but what we're going to do with this is turn it into a whipped double running stitch. And how we do that is, so we've got to have this sort of pattern where it's offsetted. And what I've done is, at the end, this is where I ended it. It went into the back of the fabric and I brought it back up through the middle of the last stitch. Now I'm going to show you a picture from the guidebook of what it's going to look like. So it's going to look a little something like that once it's done. So what we're going to do first is we're going to put the thread through the next one along on the same row, and again we're just working on top of the fabric. And then we're going to kind of do a bit of a zigzag. So we're going to go to the next row at the top, pop it through, and then we're going to work backwards at the top and bring it back down to the bottom. So through that one. And then back through this one here. see our first pattern starting to take shape. So we're going to repeat that process again through the next one along. Back up to the top. Along again. And back through the bottom. And once you've got that sort of pattern worked out, it is quite easy. It's quite difficult to get grips with that first, but just keep trying and you'll get there. Again, we're starting the process to go to the next one along, pull that through, into the top one. Oh well, it'll be bottom on the camera actually. It's upside down from where I'm looking, so along again. Back to the bottom. And then start again until you reach the end. Go through there. On the opposite row. Next one. If you're feeling adventurous, you can do 2 threads at a time and just pull it straight through. And I'm going to finish that one off by going right through the middle of this stitch. And then you would knot that off on the back. So there we have it. So we've covered the double running stitch and then we've turned that into a whipped double running stitch. So again, that's a lovely pattern. And I'd like to see you have a go and see if you can incorporate this to one of your designs. So this next technique we're going to look at is called a chain stitch. And once we've done it, it's going to look a little bit like this. That one there in the middle. Okay, so I've got my thread ready. It's got a knot in the end. We're going to come up through the fabric. So that our knot's secure at the back. And now what we're going to do is go through the same hole that we pushed it up through, but we're not going to pull it all the way through because that'll just undo what we did. So be very careful for this bit. Go it really slow until you've got a loop. And I'm going to make this loop about 1 centimetre. See there, got a bit of a loop. we pulled that through, our thread would just come through and we'd be back at square one. But what we're going to do is we're going to leave it there, and we're going to move on to our next hole, which will be about there. So we'll just measure how long your loop's going to be, and we're going to go up through the back. Now this is really important, because if you come back through the top, then you're going to have your thread getting all tangled all over. So I'm going to go up through the back. We're pulling it through. What we're going to do is pop the needle through the loop, and pull that gently to secure it. And of course we've got our loop. So that's the first link in our chain stitch. Now we've already done the first part here for the next loop. So we're going to go back into where we just came from. But remember not to pull it all the way through, because you'll just undo everything. And then we're going to do it about the same side, about a centimetre. And I like to just measure it through with the needle. And then again, we've got to remember to come through the back. And say about there. And then we'll go through the loop again. And pull gently. Then again, you can use the end of your needle just to sort of put the bits of thread where you want them to go. There's the second link. So you just repeat this process until you've got the desired length. I'm going to go back in again. Make the loop. That's alright. Through the back again. Through the loop. Pull it, and then so put the thread where you want it to go. Make sure you're happy with how it looks. Measure of the loop. If it does get tangled, don't worry about it. Just be very gentle and just sort of guide the thread where you want it to go. You might want to pull it out a little bit more, so it goes a bit more tidy. And just pull it through gently. And I'll do that loop. And then go through again, from the back. Through the loop. through the back, through the loop, pull gently, and again just sort of make it look a bit more tidy, make sure all your loops are even. Although you can do, if you wanted to, you could make some bigger ones and smaller ones, just to make a nice effect. Show it a little bit closer. So there we have it, that is our chain stitch. Okay, so for this next one, we're going to be looking at a blanket stitch. And it's going to look something like this. So, again, I've got my needle, it's all threaded, it's got a knot in the end, and my fabric. So what we're going to do first, we're going to start at the bottom left. This is bottom left for me, but I'm not sure how it will come up on the camera once it's recorded. So, just your bottom left when you're looking down at the fabric. So we're going to work in kind of like a square for each of the stitches. So imagine you're in the bottom left hand corner of the square, and that's where we're going to start. And now you can make this as big or as small as you want. I'm going to make quite a big square just so that you can see what I'm doing on the camera. So in the bottom right, we're going to go back through to the top left. I'm going to make it quite big. And then we're going to come straight back down to the bottom left, the bottom right, sorry. So we've gone in, I'll turn it upside down, I'll be able to see that. So that's bottom left, we've gone up to the top right, and straight the way through to the bottom right. I'm going to pull that through, but just like the chain stitch with the loop, we're not going to pull it all the way through. What we're actually going to do, leave a loop, put our needle through the loop, and pull. And then we've got kind of a backwards L shape, which is what we're going for. And now we're back to the beginning again, because our next square along, we're already in the bottom left hand corner. So I'm going to turn it back around to face me, but hopefully you can still see what's happening. So I'm going to go top left, top right, and lefts and rights mixed up in. And then bottom right, straight through. Making a loop, putting our needle through the loop, and pulling to secure it. Same again. Top right, bottom right, pull through till you have a loop, through the loop, and pull. Just going to do this a few more times. should have something that looks like this. I'm working quite close to the edge. I didn't really gauge how close to the edge I was, so I have kind of went down a bit. So just be mindful of that when you're working on your designs, leave a lot of space. But I'm just working with quite a small piece of fabric at the minute, so just be aware. We'll do one last one. So we start at the bottom left, up to the top right, back down to through the bottom right, pull it through so you've got a loop, through the loop and pull. And there we have our blanket stitch. So the fifth and final embroidery technique we want to look at today is a herringbone stitch. And once we've done that, it's going to look a little something like this. So it's quite a zigzag pattern, but there is a kind of technique to it. Because as you can see, they kind of cross over a little bit as well. So I've got my thread all ready, threaded through with a hole in the end, and I've got a piece of binker. I'm going to pick the needle up. What we're going to do for this, we're going to work along 2 rows of holes. So depending on how wide you want your zigzag to be, the further apart your holes will be. But I'm just going to use this area just to demonstrate on the camera. Now I'm going to come up to the bottom left. And then I'm going to create my first diagonal line. So I'm going to go somewhere around there. So it's kind of as if you're doing a cross stitch, like the first stages of it. So backward diagonal line. What I'm going to do is work backwards and go to the hole next to it, but I'm going to come up through the back, and that gets that little effect on the end where they cross over. Then I'm going to go back down to make another diagonal line into the fabric, and then we have our first part of the herringbone stitch. So then we continue again to go back. So we work backwards again, underneath, pull it through, and then onto your next diagonal line. And make sure you stay on the row, the holes that you've chosen. There. And then we work backwards again, coming up from underneath, go through, and then another diagonal line going down. Work backwards again to get that little crossover effect. And then another diagonal line onto the next row. And once again working backwards. I'm going to demonstrate a couple more of them. And I think I'm going to finish off up here. So there we have it. That is the herringbone stitch. So altogether these are the techniques we've looked at so far. So we've done the seed stitch, the cross stitch, the running stitch, the back stitch, the French knot, the threaded back stitch, the whipped double running stitch, the chain stitch, and I know these are the thread's a bit light, so I will, what's that one? Chain stitch. This one is the blanket stitch. And finally, the herringbone stitch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go off camera for a bit and I'm going to use all of the techniques that I've went through to create my own design, and then I'll pop back on and show you what I came up with. I just want to encourage you all to be creative. You can use a few of the techniques we went through, or you can use all of them. It's totally up to you. Use any different colours you want, just have fun. Try, and even if you want to write your name or something like that using the back stitch, just have a go and be creative, and I'll pop back on in a sec and show you what I've been up to. So I've been off camera for about an hour now and I've been working on this. As you can see, I've done a bit of a double running stitch along each side, and then I've done the same, but then I've topped it off with a whipped double running stitch. I've done some French knots in the corners, and then I've done a back stitch to create a heart, and I'm just in the process of filling it in with some teeny tiny cross stitch there. But that's going to take me quite a while, so I think I'll continue with this off camera, and I might get it ready for the exhibition in December. So have a little go at the techniques that we've learned so far. If you have any questions, I'm available 6 till 8 on Thursday evenings in August through the Atrium's Facebook page. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and next week we're going to be doing a bit of printmaking, so it is a little bit different but it is still related to textiles. And the week after we're going to take our printmaking and sewing and embroidery techniques and put it all together to make a product, which is going to be our tote bags and pencil cases. So I hope everyone has a lovely week, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye!